Imagine you are looking at a giant, high-definition split screen. I want you to really picture this right now because it basically sets up the entire mystery we are unpacking today.
Right, the visual really helps ground the data here.
Exactly. So on the left side of the screen, there's a graph. It's a line chart, and the line is climbing upwards. And I don't mean just a gentle slope. It's a steep, aggressive, almost unrelenting climb.
Oh yeah, it looks like a rocket trajectory.
It really does. So this line represents gross national income per capita. We are looking at a nation where that number more than doubled. It skyrocketed from $5,672 to over $13,919 over a span of about 3 decades.
Which is just the picture of absolute unbridled economic triumph.
Wow.
Visually, it's the kind of chart that economists dream about.
Yeah, but rarely ever see in the wild, right?
Exactly. Rarely in the wild. It's a testament to wealth accumulation on a massive structural scale. It tells the story of a society that fundamentally changed its weight class in the global economy.
It totally did. So keep that image in your head, the climbing line of wealth. But now, look over at the right side of your mental split screen. Here we have another line, but this one is terrifying.
It's a complete contrast.
It is. It's a steep, dramatic downward curve. And this one represents the youth population, specifically children aged 0 to 14.
Right, the literal future of the country.
Yeah. If you look at the historical records, this demographic once sat proudly at 33.4% of the total population. I mean, a full third of the country was young kids.
Which is a massive demographic engine.
And now, it has plunged to just over 14%. And, the trend line is still falling.
It's such a jarring juxtaposition. I mean, you have a society getting richer and richer, building modern infrastructure, accumulating capital.
Just generating incredible wealth.
Right, while simultaneously, the literal future of that society, the children, is just vanishing from the demographic pipeline.
Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to today's deep dive. Our mission today is to explore a massive, comprehensive research report spanning from 1960 all the way to 2023. We are tracking the complete national development of Poland.
And it is an absolute mountain of sources and historical metrics we're sifting through.
It really is. And we are doing all this to answer one central, deeply unsettling paradox. Is Poland falling into a wealthy but childless trap? I mean, can decades of relentless, brilliant economic accumulation actually offset the structural mathematical collapse of a population?
And that is exactly the tension we need to explore today. To set the stage for you, we're looking at a nation that basically pulled off an absolute miracle.
The Tiger of Central Europe. Right?
Exactly. Poland successfully transformed itself into the Tiger of Central Europe. They did everything right, according to the standard macroeconomic playbook.
It checked every box.
Every single one. Yet, because of that very transformation, they are now facing an existential race against time. And the mission for you, the listener, as we navigate these historical records, is to understand this exact tension.
Because it's not just about Poland, is it?
No, not at all. Poland's story isn't just an isolated European case study. It is a crystal ball.
A crystal ball. I like that.
Yeah, it is showing us the future for many developing economies worldwide who are desperately chasing that left side of the split screen, entirely unaware of the demographic winter that might be waiting for them on the right.
I really love that framing. But, before we can truly understand the demographic winter that is setting in, we first have to understand the economic summer that preceded it.
Oh, absolutely. You can't understand the cost without understanding the prize.
Exactly. We have to figure out how that gross national income line went up so incredibly fast, and more importantly, how it stayed up.
And the prize here was unprecedented stability.
So, looking at the macro picture, the historical records reveal a 30-year growth myth that is honestly almost entirely unbroken. There's this incredibly rare economic resilience at play here.
It's phenomenal. When you chart gross domestic product, GDP measured in constant local currency, and gross national income, they move in perfect upward parallel.
It's like watching two synchronized swimmers executing a flawless routine over a 30-year period.
That's a great way to picture it. What's fascinating here is how rare it is for a nation to evade the middle income trap.
I'm really glad you brought that up because that term, it gets thrown around a lot in economic circles, and I want to make sure we are crystal clear on how it works.
Sure, let's break it down.
Okay, so my understanding of the middle income trap is that it's essentially a nation hitting an invisible ceiling.
Right.
Like a developing country industrializes, they move people from low-yield farming into basic manufacturing, wages naturally go up, and the country hits a certain level of national wealth.
Right, they grab all the low-hanging economic fruit.
Exactly. But then, the engine stalls. Their labor isn't dirt cheap anymore, so they can't compete with the poorest countries.
Hmm.
But on the flip side, they haven't yet developed the high-tech, innovative ecosystem needed to compete with fully developed nations like, say, Germany or the U.S.
So they just get stuck in the middle, stagnating.
Yeah. Is that a fair assessment?
That's a perfect summary. They lose their initial competitive advantage of cheap labor, but they basically fail to build a new competitive advantage based on innovation. They hit the ceiling and bounce right off.
But the records indicate Poland didn't bounce off.
No, they smashed right through it. If you look at the critical leap between the year 2000 and 2023, the GDP skyrocketed from roughly 400 billion zloty to over 650 billion zloty.
Which is wild. I mean, that isn't just incremental growth. That is a massive structural leap.
Precisely. It represents a fundamental rewiring of how the country generates value. They didn't just produce more of the same basic goods, they completely changed the nature of their output.
Okay, but let me push back on this a little bit, because I'm looking at the timeline, right? Following the end of the Cold War in the early 90s, Poland had a massive amount of catching up to do with Western Europe.
True. Their economy had been severely suppressed.
Right. So is this massive growth just a post-Soviet bounce?
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Like you stretch a rubber band back for decades, you let it go, and it snaps forward.
The catch-up effect.
Yeah. Is this just the rubber band snapping back into its natural place? Or is this a fundamentally indestructible economic engine that they've built from scratch?
That is the critical question. And the historical trends strongly suggest it is the latter. This is not just a rubber band snapping back.
Why not?
Because a rubber band loses momentum the closer it gets to its resting state.
Right.
But Poland's growth actually became more sophisticated and structural as time went on. And honestly, the ultimate proof of this is how they handled external shocks.
You're talking about the 2020 stress test.
Exactly. We all know what happened globally in 2020.
Yeah, the entire world economy essentially hit a brick wall.
Supply chains shattered, borders closed, international trade literally froze overnight. But look at Poland's performance during that exact period.
It's honestly hard to believe.
Against massive, unprecedented global external shocks, Poland's GDP only slipped by a tiny margin, around 2%.
A 2% dip during a global freeze is basically a rounding error compared to the double-digit devastation we saw in other economies.
It really is. And then almost instantly it bounced back and resumed its upward trajectory. It shows that the foundation they built wasn't made of sand.
So it wasn't just propping up old state industries.
Not at all. They didn't just rebuild old, inefficient state-owned enterprises. They deeply integrated themselves into European supply chains, particularly after joining the European Union in 2004.
Right, that was a massive catalyst.
They modernized their legal and commercial institutions, and they created an environment that was highly resistant to global volatility. It's a genuine transformation, not merely a historical correction.
Okay, so let's pop the hood on that engine, because an engine is really only as good as its individual parts. It's easy for us to sit here and say, oh, they transformed, but how did the Polish economy actually change on the ground? For everyday people, I mean. How did they generate this immense wealth?
To understand the mechanics of that, we really need to look at the sectoral shift. Basically, where were people actually working in 1990 versus today?
I actually have a mental image for this one, but I want to make sure it tracks with reality. Imagine a heavy, rusty, 1990s diesel tractor sitting in a muddy field.
Okay, I see.
Now blink and watch that tractor morph into a glowing, hyper-modern server cluster in a climate-controlled room.
That is quite the visual jump.
But that seems to be what happened to the entire nation. Agriculture's share of employment plummeted from 26.2% down to 15.4%.
A massive drop.
Meanwhile, the service sector didn't just grow, it exploded, going from 41.1% to a massive 63.3%.
It's a profound structural leap. And your metaphor highlights the endpoints perfectly, but let's talk about the mechanism of how a tractor actually becomes a server cluster.
Yeah, because it doesn't happen by magic.
Right. It happens because of a massive reallocation of capital and human effort. When Poland opened up, millions of people realized that subsistence farming or working in outdated heavy industry simply wasn't going to pay the bills in a modern European economy.
So they had to adapt.
Fast. So you had a massive migration, both physically from rural areas to urban centers like Warsaw and Krakow, and educationally as people rush to reskill.
So it's not the tractor literally becoming a server, it's the farmer's children leaving the field to go learn supply chain logistics and computer science.
Exactly. Moving from an agrarian base to a knowledge-driven service economy is the absolute hallmark of advanced development. But it's not just about what they're doing domestically.
Right, you can't get that rich just selling to yourselves.
The real wealth multiplier is how they interacted with the rest of the world.
You're talking about the trade metrics?
The trade metrics are arguably the most vital piece of this entire puzzle. Exports in Poland aren't just an afterthought. They aren't just selling off their surplus goods.
They became the core model.
Yes, exports became the absolute lifeblood of the nation. If you track the numbers, by 2021, exports hit an all-time peak, representing an astonishing 60.6% of the entire GDP.
Over 60%. Just to give you, the listener, some context here.
Mhm.
In the 1990s, that number hovered around 22%. Going from 22 to 60% means your entire national business model has pivoted to serving the globe.
And specifically serving the European Union. They integrated themselves so deeply into global value chains that their economy became an indispensable node.
Like an absolutely critical gear in the European machine.
Exactly. If a German car manufacturer needed a highly complex component built quickly, reliably, and to exact EU standards, they looked across the border to Poland.
But here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because it's one thing to export a lot of stuff. You can export millions of cheap plastic toys or basic raw materials and hit high volume.
Right, but that doesn't make you wealthy in the long run.
Exactly. It's the quality of the exports that tells the real story of how they beat the middle-income trap. The records indicate that high-tech exports grew nearly tenfold. Let me repeat that for you. Tenfold.
That's a staggering multiplier.
They went from $4.36 billion in 2007 to an astounding $40.1 billion by 2022.
That right there is the definitive proof that they vaulted over the trap. You don't export $40 billion of high-tech goods by just assembling other people's cheap parts.
Right. So how do you do it? You don't just wake up one morning and decide to export $40 billion in high-tech.
Right.
What was the actual mechanism there?
It was a combination of targeted foreign direct investment (FDI) and massive domestic policy shifts.
So they rolled out the red carpet for foreign money.
They did. Poland created special economic zones with serious tax incentives to attract major global tech and manufacturing firms. And once those firms set up shop, they brought advanced intellectual property and modern production techniques with them.
Ah, so there was a knowledge transfer.
Huge knowledge transfer. The Polish workforce absorbed that knowledge. Local supply chains adapted to meet those high-tech demands, and over a decade, the domestic capacity to produce advanced electronics, software, and precision machinery skyrocketed.
And you definitely can't do any of that without the physical infrastructure to support it. A tech park is basically just an empty building if it's not connected to the world.
So true. If we look at the digital infrastructure metrics, the picture really becomes complete. Internet penetration in Poland rocketed from a mere 7.3% in the year 2000 to 88.6% in 2022.
That is a staggering jump in just 2 decades, from practically zero to almost total saturation.
Right, laying that much fiber optic cable across a country of that size in that time frame is an engineering marathon.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just basic consumer access either. We see an exponential rise in secure internet servers. You know, the kind of enterprise-grade infrastructure required for secure corporate networking and global financial transactions.
It's the heavy-duty stuff.
Yeah. The nation essentially blanketed itself in advanced fiber optics and digital security architecture. They didn't just build traditional roads and bridges. They built the digital backbone required to make a high-tech, export-driven service economy possible.
Because you simply cannot run a $40 billion high-tech export sector on dial-up.
You really can't. A server farm's just a very expensive space heater if you don't have the connectivity. But that brings us to the next massive piece of this puzzle.
The people.
Exactly. You can have all the fiber optic cables and secure servers in the world, but you can't run a knowledge economy without incredibly smart, highly capable, and healthy human beings to actually program those servers. So let's look at the people. How do the Polish people themselves change alongside this economic miracle?
The transformation in human capital is just as dramatic as the macroeconomic shifts, if not more so, because this is where economic policy directly intersects with human life.
Let's start with the sheer physical health of the population because the victories here are phenomenal. If you look at the medical trends from the 1960s to today, it is a total triumph of public health.
It really is.
Infant mortality was absolutely crushed. It fell from 54.1 deaths per thousand live births down to a world-class 3.5.
That number always gets me. Dropping infant mortality by that magnitude requires systemic, top-to-bottom changes in how a society operates.
It's not just about building a few new hospitals.
Exactly. It's about the integration of EU medical standards, massive improvements in public sanitation, ensuring universal access to prenatal care, and funding advanced neonatal units. It means shifting national resources away from heavy, polluting industries and investing them directly into human well-being.
And the result is that the vast majority of children born are surviving and thriving.
And those surviving children are living significantly longer.
Yeah, life expectancy marched steadily, relentlessly upward, moving from 67.6 years in 1960 to 77.1 years in 2022. They literally bought their citizens an entire extra decade of life.
They did. But surviving and living longer is only the baseline. To drive that high-tech export engine we just discussed, those citizens need to be highly educated.
Which brings up the education premium. Poland systematically built a massive high-quality talent pool. But what is truly fascinating when you dig into the demographics is the internal dynamics of that pool, specifically the gender skew.
This part of the data is so revealing.
It totally blew my mind when I read it. Women are significantly outpacing men in higher education in Poland. We're looking at 31.1% of women holding a bachelor's degree or higher, compared to only 24.5% of men.
It's a very noticeable gap.
I was trying to figure out why this gap exists. Is this because during the transition, men could easily get relatively high-paying manual labor or construction jobs, perhaps even emigrating to Western Europe for trades, while women were heavily funneled into the rapidly expanding domestic service and knowledge sectors that required formal degrees?
That is a very astute reading of the situation. The service economy, think finance, administration, tech, healthcare, education demands formal credentialing and soft skills. As that sector expanded from 41 to 63% of the economy, it heavily rewarded the degrees that women were disproportionately acquiring.
Wow, that makes perfect sense.
The modernization of the Polish economy was, in many ways, fueled by highly educated women entering the workforce and taking on complex knowledge economy roles. It represents a massive mobilization of human capital that was perhaps underutilized in the older, heavy industry era.
But building that talent pool wasn't without its growing pains.
No, the system was definitely stressed.
We can see the intense strain on the system in the higher education metrics. The student-teacher ratio went on a wild journey. In the 90s, it was a very comfortable 9.9 students per teacher.
Very manageable.
But as the economy demanded more and more degrees, and an entire generation rushed to university to basically avoid being left behind by the transition, that ratio worsened. The universities became incredibly crowded, hitting 22.2 students per teacher, before finally stabilizing recently at 17.0.
That fluctuation is the statistical footprint of a society desperately trying to upgrade its software. The university system was flooded, the infrastructure was stretched to its absolute limits, but they managed to process that massive influx of students, build new facilities, hire new faculty, and eventually stabilize the system.
And we really have to acknowledge that undergoing this kind of rapid total transformation, moving from agriculture to high-tech, flooding the universities, changing the entire economic structure in just a few decades, that usually tears a society apart.
It creates enormous friction.
Right. Think about it. You have traditional industries collapsing, while new industries boom. It usually creates massive inequality, resentment, and instability. How did Poland avoid ripping at the seams during this process?
The answer lies in how they managed resource distribution during the transition. To survive this rapid modernization without social collapse, Poland systematically built a very sturdy social safety net.
The ultimate shock absorber.
Exactly. If you look at the coverage metrics, their social programs successfully cover 73.5% of the poorest 20% of the population.
That's a huge coverage rate for the most vulnerable. It means almost 3/4 of the people at the very bottom have a guaranteed floor beneath them.
It is absolutely essential. By ensuring that the most vulnerable citizens had some form of financial protection, whether through pensions, unemployment benefits, or family support, the government essentially bought the social peace necessary to allow the turbulent modernization of the broader economy to proceed. The safety net absorbed the localized shocks of the transition.
Okay, so we've painted the picture of the left side of our split screen. The wealth, the health, the education, the digital backbone, the sturdy safety net. It is, honestly, a masterpiece of national development.
It's a textbook success story.
But here is where the music stops.
Yeah, this is the turn.
Because all of this incredible human capital, these highly educated, healthy, digitally connected people, they're becoming increasingly rare. We're returning to the right side of our split screen from the intro.
The demographic alarm.
Let me introduce you to what I'm calling the radar chart of doom.
Ah, I like that name for it.
If you chart the age dependency ratios, which, for you listening, basically measures how many non-working people, like children and retirees, depend on the working age population, the visual is terrifying. In 1960, the old age dependency ratio was just 9.4%, very low.
Meaning very few elderly people compared to workers.
Right. Meanwhile, the youth dependency ratio was over 54%. They had a massive, broad base of young people ready to grow up, enter the workforce, and drive the economy forward.
It's a classic demographic pyramid, heavily weighted at the bottom with youth. It's the perfect fuel for future economic expansion.
Exactly. But then, right around the year 2010, the lines on our chart crossed. The old age line was aggressively climbing, the youth line was steadily falling, and in 2010, they intersected.
The point of no return.
Yeah. By 2023, the old age dependency had climbed to 30.9%, while youth dependency had shriveled to 21.7%. Poland entered deep structural aging.
The crossing point in 2010 is the demographic equivalent of a stalling airplane engine. You might still have forward momentum from your previous speed, but the thrust is gone, and gravity is about to take over.
Let's look at the sheer volume of that lost thrust. I want you to visualize a waterfall chart where every drop of water represents a child. We're looking at a net loss of children that is honestly staggering. In 1964, there were 10 million children aged 0 to 14 in Poland. 10 million.
A huge base.
Fast forward to 2022, there are only 5.6 million.
That is a 44% drop. Nearly half of the youth population just vanished from the demographic pipeline.
I really want to linger on that for a second. Just imagine half the elementary schools in your town just boarding up their windows. Imagine half the pediatricians closing their practices. It's a 44% reduction in the literal future of the country. Why? How does a society that is getting richer, healthier, and safer stop having kids to this extreme degree?
It's a complex mix of factors, many of which are ironic side effects of the economic miracle itself.
Wait, the miracle caused the drop.
In a way, yes. First, you had significant emigration after joining the EU in 2004. Many young working-age Poles moved to the UK, Germany, or Ireland to seek higher wages, taking their future families with them.
Oh, the brain drain.
Exactly. But beyond immigration, the plunge in birth rates is heavily tied to the pressures of a modern knowledge economy. As people moved to cities, the cost of living and housing skyrocketed. Women pursuing higher education and demanding careers naturally delayed childbirth.
Right, because balancing a fast-paced career with raising kids is incredibly hard.
And the intense competition in the new service economy created deep economic anxiety despite the rising national wealth. It simply became incredibly expensive and stressful to raise a large family.
Which totally explains why the overall population growth hovered near 0% for years, just flatlining, before finally hitting negative 1.04% in 2020. They are officially shrinking. And this demographic collapse completely recontextualizes another massive metric, the unemployment rate.
Yes, the labor market metrics tell a story of severe distortion if you don't look at the underlying demographics.
Let's look at those numbers. The unemployment rate fell from a staggering near 20% in 2002 all the way down to roughly 2% in 2023. Now, if you are a politician, you are on television popping champagne, cheering about zero unemployment and a booming economy. But you look at this differently.
I do, because context changes the meaning of the metric entirely. When you achieve 2% unemployment in a rapidly growing population, it means your economy is creating new jobs brilliantly to absorb all the new workers.
A sign of robust health.
Right. But when you achieve 2% unemployment in a rapidly shrinking population, it isn't just an economic triumph. It is a severe structural labor drought.
A labor drought.
Exactly. There simply aren't enough young bodies to fill the roles. The high-tech factories we talked about, the server farms, the hospitals, they are all looking to hire, but the workers were never born. The 20% unemployment in 2002 was incredibly painful for the people living through it, but macroeconomically, it represented a massive reserve of available labor ready to be deployed.
And today,
Today, that reserve is bone dry.
it's like throwing a massive, lavish dinner party. You've spent 30 years cooking this incredible meal. You put the finest food on the table, the crystal glasses are out, the high-tech servers are humming in the background, the house is perfectly climate-controlled, and suddenly you realize you forgot to invite any new guests.
That is a very apt analogy.
The room is mostly full of the people who help cook the meal. They're all getting older and tired, and the chairs you set up for the next generation are just sitting there completely empty.
It's eerie, but accurate. And the severe problem with this scenario is that the dinner party is extremely expensive to keep running. The guests who are there need increasing levels of care and medical attention as they age, driving up those dependency ratios we discussed. But there is no one arriving to help serve the food, clean up, or pay for the next course.
Which brings us to a crucial pivot in our deep dive. Aside from running out of people, what else is this high-speed economic engine running out of? We need to talk about the hidden costs of this 30-year miracle, because every miracle extracts a toll.
And in this case, the environmental, resource, and institutional tolls are clearly visible once you know where to look.
Let's start with the physical environment. Now, there are some undeniable positives here. Water productivity, for example, improved massively. The economic value generated per cubic meter of water used went from $12.3 up to $45.9. They got vastly more efficient at using resources.
Which is great.
It is. But the physical land paid a heavy price. Agricultural land suffered irreversible losses, shrinking from 200,000 square kilometers down to 140,000.
That 60,000 square kilometer loss is immense. It is the physical footprint of urbanization, industrial sprawl, logistics hubs, and infrastructure development.
You can't just build server farms in the sky.
Exactly. You can't turn that metaphorical tractor into a server cluster or build massive export-oriented manufacturing zones without paving over the fields. It represents a permanent reduction in natural capital to fuel economic capital.
And then there is the air. Let's look at the carbon metrics, because this is a really complex, somewhat paradoxical picture. The trends show what economists call a weak decoupling of carbon from economic growth. Let me break down what that means. If you look at carbon intensity, which is the amount of carbon emitted per unit of GDP pedocene, it dropped dramatically. It went from 1.91 kilograms down to 0.16 kilograms.
Which, on its face, looks like a massive green victory. It means the Polish economy became incredibly efficient at generating wealth without generating proportionally more pollution. They're making way more money for every puff of smoke.
Proportionally being the operative word there, because when you look at the absolute total greenhouse gas emissions, the line barely budged.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it is stuck right around 310 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. So yes, they became more efficient per dollar, but because the economy grew so massively, the total amount of pollution just stayed flat at a very high level.
And this leads us to the fossil fuel trap.
Right. Let's look closely at the energy mix. The records clearly show that fossil fuels still make up about 70% of Poland's energy mix.
Now, it is vital that we look at this strictly through the lens of economic liability, setting aside any ideological judgments about European energy policy.
Absolutely. We are just looking at the numbers.
Under the European Union's strict green agreements and transition mandates, maintaining a 70% reliance on fossil fuels represents a massive, quantifiable future compliance cost.
Right. This isn't about taking sides on whether EU environmental policy is good or bad, or judging Poland's domestic energy strategy. It's strictly math. The regulations exist, and Poland's current energy mix is far outside those regulatory targets.
That friction creates a tremendous financial hurdle for the future. They will have to spend billions upon billions of zloty just to comply with the mandates capital that could otherwise be invested in AI innovation, or healthcare for the aging population, or dealing with the demographic crisis.
It acts as an immense drag coefficient on future growth. And managing a transition of that scale requires massive amounts of capital, much of which needs to come from foreign direct investment.
Which requires absolute stability. Investors hate surprises.
They really do. And if we look at the institutional indicators over the last decade, we see some interesting fluctuations. If you track the rule of law percentiles, they hit a high of 74% around 2014, but by 2022, they had dropped down to 65.1%. We also see similar fluctuations in corruption control rankings, dropping from 75% down to around 60%.
Again, remaining entirely neutral on the domestic politics behind these numbers, the macroeconomic implication is straightforward. Institutional volatility creates uncertainty.
Right. If you are a foreign investor, say a massive multinational, looking to sink $3 billion into a long-term green infrastructure project or an advanced battery plant, you require absolute predictability in the legal and regulatory environment.
You need to know that if there is a contract dispute in 10 years, the courts will enforce the rules impartially. You need to know the rules of the game aren't going to change halfway through the match.
Exactly. When rule of law percentiles drop or fluctuate, it signals to the global market that the rules of the game might be shifting. This increases risk premiums. Investors demand higher returns for taking on that institutional risk, potentially slowing down the very foreign investment Poland desperately relies on to sustain its high-tech export engine and fund its costly energy transition.
It's a delicate balancing act.
It is. So what does this all mean? We've looked at the left side of the split screen, the staggering wealth accumulation, the leap over the middle income trap, the incredible high-tech exports, the health victories.
The whole economic summer.
Right. And we've looked at the right side, the vanishing youth, the 44% drop in children, the empty chairs at the dinner party, and we've looked at the hidden costs in the land, the stagnant carbon totals, and the institutional fluctuations. Let's synthesize this deep dive.
If we pull all these disparate threads together, the core takeaway is this. Poland has successfully achieved the 20th century development dream. They built a robust, high-export, knowledge-driven economy. Their people are highly educated, they are living significantly longer, and they possess world-class digital infrastructure.
A total triumph on paper.
But the golden age of simple-scale expansion, the era of just adding more young, educated workers to more modern factories, is definitively over.
The hyper-efficient engine is built, but the fuel is running out.
Precisely. The challenge for Poland over the next decade is no longer an economic battle of catching up to the West. It is a demographic and technological battle for survival.
How so?
Well, how does a country maintain its innovative edge, pay for its multi-billion-dollar transition away from fossil fuels, and financially support a massive, growing elderly population, all while its active workforce is rapidly shrinking?
It is the ultimate test of a modern society. And it leaves us with a lingering thought. Imagine you are looking at that split screen one last time. The wealth going up, the human labor vanishing. If the young bodies are no longer there to work the secure servers, to engineer the high-tech exports, and to care for the elderly, what fills the void?
That's the billion-dollar question.
Could this severe demographic winter actually force Poland to become a global pioneer in mass automation and artificial intelligence? Out of pure existential desperation, will robots, algorithms, and automated systems become the synthetic youth that saves the middle of Europe? Or will the sheer crushing financial weight of an aging population freeze the tiger in its tracks before it has the capital to adapt?
It's going to be fascinating to watch unfold.
It really is. Something for you to think about. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the data. We've unpacked the paradox, and now the future is waiting to be written. Until next time.